Thank you very much for the invitation to address you at this conference. I welcome the opportunity. I would also like to express my appreciation for the work of the Association of Polish Cities. You've been active since 1917, doing important work which deserves acknowledgement. My friends, I'm the son and the grandson of mayors. From childhood, I've had a first-hand view of what it's like to be the mayor of, at least in my case, of a small city. I've opened the front door or I've answered the phone on so many times it's impossible to count, with citizens looking for help to gain access to social housing, better healthcare, groups looking for places for their children to play, complaints about the lack of disability access. The list goes on and on and on. And you can distill all of those reasons people were coming to our front door, phoning my father, as being about the quest for respect for human dignity. Or to put it another way, I've learned through my own childhood experience that the work of mayors on behalf of cities is about honouring the dignity of their peoples in all their rich diversity. Today, we can talk about that pursuit of dignity, that work for dignity, as being work for and about human rights. We can say that because of the achievement since the Second World War of the development of a system of protection of rights captured in such fundamental documents as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, and in the case of the EU, its Charter of Fundamental Rights. Already back in 1979, referring generally to what has been achieved for human rights since the Second World War, Pope John Paul II described it as being perhaps modernity's greatest achievement. Similar words were used just a few weeks ago by his successor, Pope Francis, also speaking about the centrality of human rights for our societies. Human rights triggers duties for our states. That's at the essence of the international agreements. And for much of the time since the establishment of the system, the focus of that duty has been on central government. But of course, the city is also part of the state. It shares in the duty. And so the question arises, what does that duty mean in terms of the day-to-day work of cities? This is an issue that has not been sufficiently explored until recent times. However, it is possible already now, building on experience across the world, not just in Europe, that we can identify a number of foundations or pillars for cities embracing formally a human rights approach to their work. Let me mention 5 basic principles. The first is that it's important for cities to explicitly embrace the treaties and the commitments. Take the European Convention on Human Rights, the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Take them and explicitly declare that they are binding for the work of the city. Secondly, it's critical, if you're to be true to the core message, the core commitments of these treaties, that a city adopts an equality agenda, that it seek out and tackle every inequality, every form of discrimination within the context of its mandate and its capacities. Third, and this is the flip side of equality, it's necessary to have a human rights approach for a city to embrace the diversity of our peoples, to celebrate the extraordinary differentness of our people, regardless of class, of gender, sexual orientation, ability, or whatever else it might be, including, of course, race. Fourth, a human rights approach, a treaty-based human rights approach, is an approach that's accountable, that is transparent, that allows the people who live in our cities, to whom we hold ourselves accountable, to be able to assess and determine whether we're delivering on our commitments. And fifth and finally, and it's very closely related to what I've just said, a human rights approach requires us to be highly participatory in our efforts, to involve the people who live in cities in the decisions, in the process, in the outcomes that impact their well-being. Now, honouring these 5 principles and everything else that comes with being serious about human rights is far from easy. What are the issues? Well, one is that you have to convince others to come along with you. It's not enough that a mayor be passionate about human rights, but the entire administration of the city has to get the point. And that's often very difficult to achieve, even though it's essential. A second challenge, which is a much less benign one, is the challenge of pushback against intolerance and hatred. A pushback against the repudiation of the diversity that I spoke of earlier. Third, and again closely related, it's not always popular to stand up for human rights. And so the leaders of cities who take on this function have to be willing to manage the inevitable unpopularity in certain groups, including voters. And the flip side of that, of course, is the need for courage. And then one final challenge I'd mention today is the challenge of what we say in the jargon of mainstreaming human rights for our cities. It's not just about how the police work. It's not just about avoiding discrimination. It goes right across all aspects of the work of the city, and it requires an adequate visibility in the budgeting also of the city. And this is difficult. Now, taking account of the seriousness of the commitment for human rights of cities and the difficulties such as those I've laid out now, I want to express deep appreciation for achievements in so many Polish cities. I'm thinking, for example, and these are just examples, of the refugee integration work in Gdansk, of the celebration of diversity in Lublin, of the serious engagement with the European Pillar of Social Rights in Poznan and Warsaw, and so many others that there isn't time to mention today. Now, as you all continue to explore this area of life, the role of human rights in your cities, I'd like to offer you the continued support of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. Use our data, use our evidence, use our survey stories about the patterns of discrimination and inequality in our European cities. It's readily available, and we will help make it ever more easily accessible. It is often disaggregated by country. And so, for example, you can see what we are seeing with regard to Polish society and even Polish regions through our evidence and our data, as well, of course, as our human rights legal analysis. We're also ratcheting up our focused support for cities, not just in Poland, but right across the EU. And right now, we're far advanced in developing with cities a framework for human rights cities, something I think that will be of great help as we all proceed together. Allow me, if you will, to conclude with the words of a mayor. I would like to take just one quote from Paweł Adamowicz, who spoke these words just a few months before he died. The quote is from 2018. He said, and I quote, "Therefore, we appeal. A safe future can only be built on a difficult way of responsibility for the course of affairs here and now. The means of responsible patriotism is to look for what is common, what unites and does not divide, reconciliation, not revenge. That is why, in public life, we call for priority of law, not strength, trust, not hostility, truth, not lies." Dear mayors, those are the words of human rights. Thank you for your attention.